Hi, bud.
Good morning.
How's my bud?
Doing well. How are you?
It's good to see you. Hi, Vince.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you, buddy.
I think they should like change. Okay. Morning. I'm
Good
sorry
morning.
All that is in all your videos.
That's okay. It's an additional light source for me.
I'm trying to dull it.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody.
Morning. I don't think they came to see you today.
No.
Yes, sir. Yep.
How many are here for the first time? A lot of you. Okay. We welcome all of you. Back when we had 15 or 16 in this room, we had plenty of time for introductions, but obviously we don't anymore. So I hope that you have had an opportunity to meet some new friends. We have a minimum of 270 people that are watching this today. A bunch, thankfully, are online from all over the country. And I want to say thank you to you for your interest, for your perseverance on getting up on a wintry February morning in Green Bay. Today we're going to have a lively discussion. For those of you who are new to our think tank format, I typically spend half the time laying out the subject, and then we just launch into a good interactive discussion. This isn't a lecture. The one piece of feedback that we've been hearing is people online cannot hear the questions. So today I'm going to be repeating back the questions so that people can hear. How many were here last month? So there will not be a repeat presentation on laxatives that I gave last week. I said, John, you left that in the presentation, did you? And he said, I sure did. So you never know where one of our presentations is going to go. So today, we are going to be talking about part 2 of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the stuff of leadership in today's world. Leadership is no longer about authority and competence. You've got to have competence to be an effective leader, but today, the emotional, relational side of leadership is the key to effective leadership of people. In fact, the research shows that 81% of leadership success is based upon emotional intelligence factors. 81% of leadership success is based upon emotional, relational, emotional intelligence factors. Someone asked me yesterday, what is leadership? And I said, in a nutshell, it is the ability to move a room. It is the ability to move a group of people enthusiastically from here to here. And you cannot do that without relationships. There was a person who was an atheist one day who went to the Bishop of Canterbury and said, you know what? I do not believe in the power of prayer. I don't believe in prayer. I think anything that happens around prayer is a coincidence. And he said to the gentleman, you know, you may be correct. All I know is when I pray, there are a lot of coincidences that keep happening. Emotional intelligence is like that too. That it's hard to quantify directly, immediately, what the results are. But I get that question all the time, especially, by the way, I rarely get this question from emotionally intelligent executives. But folks who are driven, folks who just see everything as the bottom line, they will ask me this question a lot. They will ask me, what is the return on investment of emotional intelligence? And what they're often really implying is, I think it's squishy, I think it's soft, I think it's gooey, and I really don't see the value, and you have to prove it to me. So I will tell you, there is a ton of statistical analysis and research out there that shows about the incredible impact of emotional intelligence upon you, your leadership, leading a family, leading a team, leading an organization. And what I want to do is just share some of that with you. So I wrote down some facts here. Gave you some examples here. Restaurants, the restaurant world, they found that restaurants who have managers who have high EQ, they reported that they have higher guest satisfaction, they have reduced turnover, and that all of this combined for a profit margin of 34% higher than restaurants who are led by leaders who have very little value of emotional intelligence. There's a manufacturing company that began to stress emotional intelligence with their leaders, specifically their supervisors on the floor. They found that there was a 50% reduction in time lost through accidents. They also found that there was an 80% decrease in formal grievances. What does that tell you about morale? If you've got an 80% reduction in formal grievances, what does that tell you what's going on in that area? High trust. And people are feeling valued and people are feeling included. Grievances go down when people feel cared for. Did you hear that? Resistance to change goes down when people feel cared for. And they also found this same company, once they set in emotional intelligence, they exceeded the highest production goal in their department that they ever had by $250,000. L'Oreal Cosmetics began to emphasize emotional intelligence as a key criteria to who they would hire in their sales department. And they made a decision that for the next year, we're not going to focus on traditional sales techniques. We are going to teach and help develop deeper emotional intelligence in our sales force. They found that those sales, as a result of that, they found that they had 63% less turnover with their sales force. 63%. They also found that, and what they did is they took half of their leaders and they began to do this kind of deep work. And they said, anybody else want to check out on this? Half of them said, nah, we don't need this stuff. When they compared the revenue production of the half that said, nah, we don't need this stuff, versus the sales people who began to work on what we're talking about today, their revenue was 139% greater than the ones who had arrived as salespeople. Are we making a point? Now, are you guys out there? Are you guys with me? So let's look on other ways to look at this. We know that 75% of executives whose careers become derailed, the reason 75% of the factor for their careers becoming derailed has to do with emotional intelligence factors. In other words, the inability to relate, the inability to connect with their people, putting tasks ahead of people, urgency ahead of listening. We also know that 81%, again, of all factors for success are emotionally related factors. Now, what is emotional intelligence? Let's talk about that very quickly. There's 4 factors to emotional intelligence. Number 1, it is self-awareness. You cannot lead other people until you begin to lead yourself first. What I mean by self-awareness, you begin to become aware of what you look like emotionally, in terms of your moods, in terms of how you deal with conflict, how you deal with stressful situations. You become very, very aware of what your tendencies are. And not only are you aware of your tendencies, you know what kick off those tendencies or trigger those tendencies, and you also know what's the impact on a team. We have we do have some chairs up here, you all, if you guys want a place to sit. You're more than welcome to come up here. And we don't want we want you to come in quietly, Chris, okay? So it's good to have you. And so the first factor of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. We have a process here called Big Guy, Little Guy. And what it does is it shows that when leaders are in environments where they feel highly stressed or in conflict, or they don't feel safe, or they feel devalued, not heard, or included, what we know is that leaders go into what we call your backup mode or your child mode. And you begin to use behaviors as a leader as an overcompensation trying to get control of the situation. And those behaviors that have worked for us as kids begin to backfire on us as adults. And what we know, every single person in this room, including me, has a child side. And I promise you, how many of you lead teams? How many of you are involved in teams? Just about everybody in this room. I promise you, your team members do not know it, but they don't know how to describe it, but they already know your child side. And in a team that's not safe, they talk about it with everybody except whom? Except you. And it'll look like this. Oh, Fred's having a bad day again. Okay, here we go. You know Fred. And gang, we call that Little Freddy. Little Freddy, when he comes out, my team can actually, they will tell me body language. I have a bald spot right here. Because for years, when I would get stressed and start obsessing, I do have OCD, I would go like this. And I literally have worn out the hair over the 31 years that I have lived. Notice my numbers. And so my team will tell you, when Fred starts going this, he's got something on his mind and he's probably overstressing. When I go into Little Freddy, I check out. When I go into Little Freddy, my charisma moves to manipulation. I become highly controlling, and I go into ADD mode. I want 9 times, if this needs to be done, and this needs to be done, and this needs to be done, and there's all kinds of confusion. And my team knows when I'm in that environment. And they also know what triggers me into that environment. And they will say to me, time out, is this Fred or is this Freddie? And they say it in a respectful fashion. And when I know that when I'm in that place, I do not make good decisions. When I'm in that place, I am actually pushing my team away from me instead of repelling. Does that make sense? And I often can't see it. Why? Why can't you see yourself? Talk to me. Why can't you see yourself when you're in that place? You guys got to talk to me. Because you're too close to yourself. You can't see it. And so leaders who have high emotional intelligence, the way that they build their own awareness, they say to their team, and in our exercise we say, what do I look like when I'm in my adult mode? When I feel secure, when I feel safe, that's me at my best. That's the side of me that creates trust, that brings people toward me. But the child side is the side that pushes people away. It causes people not to be honest, not to be transparent. And so my team will tell me exactly what I look like. And so I have become, if you're going to develop emotional intelligence and an awareness of your best sides and your less effective sides, you got to be able to ask your team, look, what do I look like when I get stressed? What do I look like when it feels like what we're up against it? And you've got to give your team permission to say, hey, Fred, what's going on? Because I'm seeing you're in your less than effective side. So we spend a lot of time with executives helping them to become aware of what they look like in their adult side and what they look like in their backup style. And we teach teams how to be transparent about that, because when their leader goes into the backup style, they're telling you something is wrong. Did you hear that? They're telling you something is wrong. And we need to, and so let's talk about it. So the first thing about emotional intelligence is we know it has to do with self-awareness. The second thing about emotional intelligence is that it is becoming, it is the ability to show self-restraint. How many of you have ever made a decision when you're ticked off? Anybody here? How many of you, when you were so angry because of what someone did, you decided to take it because you were so righteously upset, you dealt with it right then? Anybody ever done that in the middle of anger? How'd it work out for you? It's like throwing it and hoping it sticks. What we know is effective leaders who have high emotional intelligence have the ability to restrain themselves until they get emotionally under control, and they can gather information before they start dealing with problem solving. Does that make sense? And it gives people the impression that this is a person that's under control. This is a person who is fair. This is a person who is not just going to go off and shoot from the hip. And when you're in a high change environment, your people are looking for a leader who is predictable in a stable, fair way in how they deal with disagreement and conflict. Have you ever been around a leader who's like this emotionally? What's the rest of the team like? Same thing. Have you ever been around a leader that has a temper or a rage problem? And it doesn't come out every day, but the team doesn't know it's not going to come out. What's the team doing on the other 29 days of the month? They're waiting to see what is happening, and they start walking around on eggshells. Emotionally intelligent leaders are not all over the board. They're constantly working and talking to themselves, wait a second, slow yourself down. Get yourself under control. I love the statement, the person who is under control in conflictual environments gains control. The person who remains under control gains control. Does that make sense? And so part of effective leadership is the ability to begin to self-regulate yourself when your anger is out, when your fear is out. The third thing about emotional intelligence, it's the ability to read the emotional cues of others that you're leading. It's the ability to read emotional cues, looking at the ability to look at their behavior and say, time out, that's not their pattern. What's going on? If you are an emotional, a person who does not value emotional intelligence, a more traditional leader, if someone's having a bad day, what are you likely to do as an not an emotionally intelligent leader? I'm sorry? What are you likely to do? Talk to me. Criticize. Hey, come on. Be an adult here, okay? This is a professional environment. we really need you to leave your stuff at home and be an adult. Does that work? Is that an effective process? What you don't realize is when someone has changed their patterns, or when their mood is not what it normally is, they're giving you information. And leaders are always looking for different paths of sources of information to make decisions. Does that make sense? And if you've got a leader who suddenly begins to act in a way that is not their normal pattern, they're giving you information that there may be something going on under the table either with them or your team or your organization. And an effective leader is wise enough to say, I'm going after that. I'm going to find out what's going on. And so in order to be able to read the social cues of your team, you've got to be connected to your team. You've got to know them well enough that you know what they look like when they're not on their A game. You know what triggers. And as a result of that, emotional intelligent leaders are committed to building deep, authentic relationships with their people. I don't hold this against me, but I grew up in Bloomington, Indiana, where Indiana University was. They are not exactly a mecca for college football. In fact, they're the losingest Division I team over the last 20 years. They have a coach that turned that around in 3 years. No college head coach experience. He was a high school football coach in Florida and then in Indiana, and they recruited him. He's gone this year. They've won more games than any team in Indiana in the last 25 years and tied with the most in the last 50 years. They asked, which means they won 3 games. I don't know why I said that. That was terrible. And so they asked him 2 weeks ago, what has been the secret to your success of turning a culture around that has been pathetically mediocre for so long that it's pervaded by hopelessness? And he said to the reporter, tell you what, I'll answer your question, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to 5 of my players. I don't care who you go to. You ask them that question. They went to those 5 players and they said, what has been the secret of Coach Allen's success here at Indiana? And all 5 of these big, tough football players said, they said Leo. And they went, what? They said Leo. All 5 of them. And the reporter said, what do you mean by Leo? And they said, love everyone. Love everyone. They went to Coach and he said, okay, here's what they said. He says, I know what they said. They said Leo, didn't they? And they said, exactly. He said, they developed a commitment to each other in that locker room that in the tough times they were going to be there for each other. When one of them was struggling, they were going to talk about it. If one of them was making a fool out of themselves and how they were behaving, they were going to talk about it. They had each other's back. And they became, and because of that chemistry, the higher the level of chemistry, the greater the level of accountability that you can have. The higher the level of chemistry that you have, the greater the level of difficult conversations that you, the greater the level of chemistry, the tap dancing around issues goes down. And directness of conversations goes up. Make sense? Clarity of direction goes up. And so emotional intelligence learns how to read the social cues of your people because you are connected. Ben, you've been a college coach. You've been a great college player at University of Wisconsin. And you've coached for some pretty prolific coaches. What's your response to the validity of what I'm saying? Am I full of crap? And if you are, please keep it to yourself.
No, I think
So we have a volleyball coach here from UWGB. Where is she? What's your response to this?
I love all of this.
It's my idea. Me and Al Gore, we invented the internet. I just want you to know that. What's your response, honestly?
I'm on board with everything. My assistant coach, Corey's here, and I thought of a story with me lacking self-awareness because I'm all about inclusive culture, and we don't really make them run during practice. It's all about them figuring out things out and empowering them, and I don't want to go away from that.
Yeah.
That's what studies, show that you want the random training.
Yeah.
And one day I just decided, because I didn't think that we were improving enough, maybe we should start running laps in practice. And he called me out and there was something wrong. And so I needed to have more self-awareness, and my staff got me back on board. But showing that you care and having that culture is so important. And I think our program does a good job of direct conversations because we have shown that we care about each other. But even coming here, it's like, I want to do better.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so thank you for your thank you for your input. Both of you handled that just like what we had practiced before the session. The third thing is, so the first is about self-awareness. The second is about self-regulation. The third is about learning to being so connected to your people relationally that you learn how to read when something's off on their game. And you also learn as a source of information, I need to go after that because it may be a direct impact upon what's going on in their environment. And then the fourth is it's a commitment to to appropriate social skills. And here's what that means. I'm coaching a young man in Montana right now. And he will go into a room and walk by 10 people without saying hello to them. And he doesn't think that's a big deal. And I said, wait a second. When you do that, you are sending a message to your people that they don't matter and that they are simply tools and they are assets to you. He says, I don't mean that to do that. I said, I know you don't mean to do that. But just beginning, when you walk into a room, here's what emotionally intelligent leaders do. When I walk into this room, every person that I talk to, I have a desire to show dignity. I want to look at them eye to eye. I want to show them by my eye contact and by my listening and stopping what I'm doing and not doing. By the way, this is a poor emotional intelligence behavior. Vince, talk to me.
I got to text you. Hold on.
Okay, I'm hearing what you're saying. I got you. I'm listening. And I'm doing this. What messages am I sending to Vince? He's irrelevant, and there's something else that is more important than right now. And gang, when that happens, you are sabotaging your leadership. And I tell people that here's what Leo does. Leo goes in and it says, every conversation that I'm going to have today, I want to treat that person as they are the only person in the room at that moment. In fact, I want to treat them as if they are the only person in my world at this moment. And people respond when they feel that someone sees them as valued, important, and significant. Does that make sense? And so they work on relationship. They work on making sure that they're connecting with people, that they're listening to people, that they're being friendly with people. As simple as that sounds, it is a huge impact upon your ability to lead a team. Now, I'm certain I could go on, but I know that some of you have questions, some of you have comments. What's your reaction to this, Vince?
I just had a question about recognition and celebration about this whole thing, right? You're trying to lead a team, you are leading a team, and yeah, you're doing really good with leading a team by listening, and you want to reward that without looking like, soft, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, maybe that's not the right adjective, but talk a little about that, about saying, hey, this is the right way to do business and to develop a good culture.
This same person said to me out in Montana, he said, I know this is going to sound kind of soft, but should I tell that person thank you? Did you hear that? We've been taught that if you show gratitude and you say thank you and I need you and I appreciate you, the old school was that's a bunch of soft stuff. Today, it is the essence of leadership. Gang, you cannot hold people accountable to move the bar to another level if you are not putting water in their well. And there is a direct correlation between the balance of having difficult conversations and having reward and recognition. Does that make sense? Oh, by the way, you also, emotionally intelligent leaders, make a commitment not to be top-down dictatorial leaders. Did you hear that? If they do go top-down, it is because there is a crisis that's going on in the organization, that the speed of the decision is just as important as the quality of the decision for the survival of the organization. And they go temporarily into a top-down mode. However, they're transparent about it. This is why we need to do it. Their team knows this is not their style, and that they're doing this because it's strategically critical right now. But as soon as the crisis is over, what's the expectation? That you move out of top-down leadership and you move into strategic partnership, consensus-building relationships. That's an emotional, intelligent leader. And you can't create accountability in an environment that does not have consensus. Because today is the first generation that we've ever had that you have to ask for permission, or you have to have people's permission to hold them accountable. And the permission is given through relationship credibility. Guys, got me on that? So anybody else, what's your responses to this? Anything that you're wrestling with in your teams? Yes, sir.
So, as a younger person, how do you deal with an older person with the old school values or way of looking at things? Do you go with the old school way of like, I'm tough, no thank you, or do you go with the new way of saying thank you?
Wow. He said, for those of you who are online, when you're a younger person and you're dealing with an older person who has a more traditional value system, and they see that what we're talking about is soft and it's weak and it's ineffective and it's goody two-shoe and all of that, you're going to run into that. You cannot lower your game because of that person's insecurity. You have to understand they are there for a reason, and they're there not because they're stupid, and they're there not because they're incompetent. They're afraid to get vulnerable because they've been in a world that when they've gotten vulnerable, they got burned. Make sense? I'm dealing right now with, yesterday, a young man from South Carolina, a pastor from South Carolina, called and said, my supervisor, he described this very situation. And he says, he keeps me at an arm's length. How do I handle it? And I said, you be you. Allow him to be where he is without judgment. But just love on him. Accept him where he is, and then you do everything that you can just being yourself. That's the only thing I can tell you. You can't try to change that person. You have to accept where that person is, start and just be you with him or with her. Make sense? Who else? Comments, questions? Yes, Brad.
My own personal experience. I was vice president of our family business. And at the time I was vice president, we had about 325 employees. My lunch break, not because I had to, I liked to, I'd walk the floor. I'd go through the mail department, the shipping department, manufacturing. What that led to was whenever there was an issue going on, HR was getting ticked off, and my dad was getting ticked off because people were coming to me.
Yes.
Because they created that relationship.
Yep.
The key to what you said when you asked was, but if it's not genuine, it isn't going to work.
Yeah.
How do you get, when you're trying to teach this, that you don't come off phony when you're trying to be one-on-one with people?
That is a great question. What if you're doing it because you're doing it so that people will follow you? Right. That's not leadership, that's manipulation. Okay? If you're doing it because it's a gimmick, you're doing it because it's a new technique that I can take a shortcut to win people's loyalty. Listen, people intangibly are smart. And they will figure that out, that you are not being sincere or genuine, and you'll actually dig yourself a bigger hole than just be straight up. I'm a jerk, I'm going to say it. I don't have the skill set to do anything else. I mean, they'd rather hear that than you trying to play games with them and insult them as if they can't figure that out. Make sense? Yes, sir, back in the corner.
Going back to the comment there, you mentioned you don't think you can change that older individual. Why not change them? I mean, as a young leader, wouldn't it be great to just bring it to light to say, hey, let's try a different approach and the aha moment with that older individual?
That's a great question. Why not change? Well, here's the point. You have no choice over that person's choice to change. You have no control over that person's choice to change. You do have control over being authentic with that person. When he or she is being gruff, to say, look, I just got to tell you that when you do that with me, it's not working. In fact, it has the opposite of what you're trying to do. And for you and I to be able to work, this is what I need from you. And you begin to set boundaries and you begin to lay out expectations. But you're not doing it to get that person to change. You're doing it in order to be true to yourself and to do what you believe is right. Does that make sense? Good questions. Who else? Anybody else?
I'll comment on his comment.
Okay.
Eventually, you'll win them over, or they'll just work themselves out of your way.
Eventually, you win them over, or they'll work themselves out of the way. When you develop a culture that kind of chemistry, where you have people's back, and there's nothing that you can't say to your team, and you know that they're not going to talk behind your back, that they're going to shoot straight with you. In that kind of team gang, you've got a group of people called naysayers in any kind of large organization, and they are the folks that are addicted to chaos, and they also are constantly stirring stuff up from under the table. And when you begin to develop this kind of emotionally connected, relationally connected environments, they absolutely begin to feel completely out of place in that kind of environment. And toxic leaders cannot survive or thrive in an environment where people are working together on high trust, high transparency, accountability, and vulnerability with each other. It is the greatest tool that I know to weed out your toxic leaders who are creating drama on your team. Now let's talk about another aspect of emotional intelligence. How many of us have ever had a bad day at work where you were questioning your value, your self-worth? What am I doing here? Is anybody here? No, okay. Well, I do have a background in therapy, and I'll spend some extra time with you. Guys, so I get this call yesterday from a friend, a young man, and he comes in, and I laugh. He said, Dr. Fred, I need to talk to you. And I said, why? He said, because you've got your act together. And I just started laughing. I said, are you kidding me? And I said, look, I have bad days all the time. I have days every day where I've got these little messages that I'm not enough. I've got these little messages that are going on that says I'm a fraud and I hope people don't figure me out. All the time I've got these little messages. And he said, well, how have you been able to be as effective as you are? And I said, well, here's what I've learned. I said, it wasn't always that way, and I called him by name. And I said, let me tell you a story. For the first 14 years of this company, we had a 3-year cycle of a pattern of success and sabotage every 3 years. Every 3 years, we would get up to a certain place, and somehow most of the team would start leaving. And it was because they weren't good enough. They couldn't satisfy. I was such a raving perfectionist. And when things weren't going well, I'd overcompensate, and my workaholism would kick in, and my perfectionism would kick in, and I became a leader that you didn't want to be around because you weren't performing the expectations. So by golly, we're going to shame and guilt you up to excellence. And it would change every 3 years. Every 3 years. And so when I began to really work on my own self-awareness, one of my friends said, "Are you aware you've got this pattern?" Said, here's, and he gave me this marvelous advice. He said, the number one strategic thing that you can do as a leader is get out of your own way. Get out of your own way. And I said to the young man, this is what I mean. When you're having a bad day, and you're questioning your value, and someone has just had a sharp conversation with you that's inappropriate, and your self-worth is here, sometimes what we do is overcompensate, and we make decisions of something, or we try to prove ourselves, and we make decisions when we're in those low points. And I said to my friend, here's what I've learned when you're having a bad day. He said, what do you do? I said, that's a great question. You do nothing. You don't make judgments. You don't make conclusions. You don't make a decision, because in that day, what is going on in your mind? Is it clear? It's most likely very distorted. And what you're going to do if you make a decision or a conclusion, or you're going to address that problem because you're so upset about it, what you're probably going to do with that problem is you're going to take a big shovel and you're going to take a 10-foot hole and you're going to what? You're going to make a 20-foot hole. And I said, I've learned that if I simply will remind myself that a good night's sleep will change a lot of perspective. And that if it's a problem today, it's going to be a problem tomorrow. And I said, I've learned that simply don't come to conclusions, don't come to judgment, don't act, just get through the day without throwing gasoline on the fire. So that when the day's over, you can get out of that hole with a step ladder instead of a 75-foot extension ladder. How many of us have ever done that? Emotionally intelligent leaders say, today I will not act because I know my mind is not clear. That's an example of a company that keeps momentum because they don't keep starting over. They don't keep blowing out. They just add an inch by inch by inch. That's an emotionally intelligent team and an emotionally intelligent leader. And I can tell you, we have tripled our revenue in the last 2.5 years here. We started off with 16 of this. Guys, there's nothing really great that we've done. I just quit sabotaging myself because I had a team who wouldn't let me sabotage myself. You can't do this by yourself. You cannot do this on an island to yourself. We all need a community of people who care about us, who will tell us the truth. Make sense? Anybody else? Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, so because it's harder for ourselves to see ourselves, do you have any recommendations or tools to measure emotional intelligence and maybe find out where the gaps are that we could work on?
Yes. So we actually have an assessment that tells you what you look like when you go into your child mode. When your emotional intelligence is almost bankrupt at that moment. And the way that plays itself out is how you handle conflict, or you're in an environment of you've got a team and you've got all these kinds of ideas that are coming out, and the team is disagreeing with you. Has that ever happened? And you're feeling, oh my gosh, they're rejecting me. And in times of high tension, high conflict, lots of ideas and robust dialogue going on in the room, what often happens is you're going to go into one of 4 conflict modes. One conflict mode, which is the most common, is we just what? We shut down. We don't deal with it. We tell ourselves it's not a conflict. And we find a way to minimize it. A second one is that we go in to I must be right mode. I am going to bury you with facts. I am not going to stop this thing until I get my way. I'm going to wear you out until you finally capitulate and say, whatever. You ever been around people like that? A third is verbal attack. That I'm not going to say anything. But I'm going to let it fester. And it festers, and it festers, and all of a sudden, some little tiny thing happens. And what happens? It all comes out. And it wasn't about that. It was about all of that. Make sense? And the fourth one, and this is me, is dictatorial steamroller. I'm very proud of that title, okay? That is, it's got to be my way, and if you get in my way, watch out. And you will crush people to get to a goal or to get to an end result. And so part of emotional intelligence is learning what is your style when you go into that. That's your child mode. That's what you do. And when you're in one of those four styles, you are not leading. You're just building a deeper hole. And so the other thing is you literally say to your team, this is what I look like. This is when I get into this place, I'm asking you and giving you permission to please have the conversation with me about it. You've got to give your team permission for that conversation. With me? And that goes back to the last statement that leaders become comfortable with being uncomfortable. When someone's having that conversation with you, they're doing it because they care. And human nature is you want to check it down. You want to check out and you want to say, no, I don't. Gang, become comfortable with being uncomfortable. Receive the information. Soak on it. Because if you get defensive with them, what are they going to do the next time they see it? You shut down the information flow. I will tell you what great teams do is they're candid with each other. This is what you look like, Fred, when you're not your best. And this is the impact of your behavior on this team, Fred, when you do that. Okay, I get it. And that's not a value judgment on me. That's just areas that I need to grow and get better, but it doesn't mean that I don't have value and I don't have infinite worth. Make sense? But your team has got to lean in with you. This is a team game. Anybody else before we close this down? Yes, sir.
Fred, a couple examples from my own career. I'm married to someone who is the complete opposite of me. Okay, and we're happily married. We haven't been for a long time. How that leverages into a success in a workplace environment is, as a leader, whether in crisis mode or going after big, near impossible goals, I love asking and being asked, what do you think about whatever it is?
Wow. Okay?
Focusing strictly on solutions to find a better way. No, I don't want to focus on the blame or the yeah buts. Focus on solutions and encourage people to think creatively, think transformatively, think move the needle.
That's awesome.
And push back. I may present an idea, and then I encourage people, push back.
So the four critical signs of a leader. Here are 4 critical phrases that highly emotional leaders use all the time. Thank you. Second, I appreciate you. Third, I'm sorry. And fourth, what do you think? Yes, sir.
Since we're talking about our wives, I've learned something that I now apply to my team as well. The question is, how do you want me to love you, right? I love surprises, she hates surprises. And I used to surprise her all the time.
Yeah.
I like surprises.
Yeah.
And I realized that it was, right?
Yeah.
I tell her when we're going to do something instead of just like, hey, we're going to the airport and we're having a fun weekend. And I've learned the same thing with my team, asking them how they want to be worked with, how they want to receive feedback. And I think that's a really important
That's great. We're talking dialogue. Tracy and I are working with a team right now that has been victimized by generational trauma over many, many generations. And trust between them as a team is a real challenge. And they said, how do we deal with it when you've had history with someone on your team and you're trying to reset that relationship? Here's what an emotional intelligent leader will do. They will go to that person and put it on the table. Look, we have history. And I'm as much a part of this as anything. In fact, I'm willing to own every part that I need to own. But what do we need to do to reestablish trust? And it's a process, it's not an event. And so, what do you need from me that I have not done well in the past? That if I provide that consistently, your belief in me and trust in me will begin to go up. Did you hear that? What do you need from me? We have history. We need to reset this thing. What do you need? And then and you end that conversation by saying, may I ask you, can I share with you what I need from you? Notice I didn't say, and now it's my turn. What do you say? You say, may I have your permission to share what I need from you? That shows an act of respect. And it's a two-way thing. As we move forward, this is what I need from you. Gang, if you have members in your organization or your team that you need to have a reset, emotionally intelligent leaders will have the discussion that I just talked about. It's not going to be easy, but you got to do it. So gang, we're over our timeline. Has this been helpful? Gang, listen, there's no magic pill here. There's no magic pill. I can tell you though, if you do not work at becoming excellent in emotional intelligence in today's world, you may not gain a team's loyalty. Last thing, I've got a company I'm working with right now in another state that they had a CEO who was blind to it and had created such an environment that his people were afraid to tell him the truth. And he was like this. He was all over the board. And finally, they called me and said, we're sick of it. We're sick of it, and we're not going to put up with this anymore. And would you come over here and at least have an intervention, which always are effective. And so I went over as a last, and he was not owning, he didn't own anything. Not only did he not do this, he did this. And very quietly, every member of his executive team walked out. And in 3 weeks, that organization has gone from an organization of doing $280 million a year in government contracts as just a sliver, that they are 3 weeks away from closing doors. Because they lost the faith in an emotionally dense leader. So, is there a return on investment? You bet there is. I hope this has been helpful. Gang, we're going to figure out this crowd thing, okay? If we have to move into we're talking about moving into this building. We've been doing it for, talking about this for 2 years, which is a sign of emotional intelligence with me, because I wanted to do it when? Right now. And I have a team that keeps going, whoa, wait a second, you're moving too fast, little Freddie, you're moving too fast. And I have to trust them. And they have, and we'll figure it out. But I am so honored that you guys are here. We're going to do another one next month. And invite your friends. We appreciate you. And we've got lots of coffee around here. We've got seats and couches and all kinds of stuff to hang out. So let's give ourselves a hand. Tony?
What if I don't have any friends?
Tony, I'm sorry.
Easy team to take care of.
That's right. See you guys.
Fred, thank you as always. That was a blessing, man.
Thanks, bud.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you, Vin.